Let's talk about what's happening in Alabama right now, because I would argue that of all the issues going on with Christian nationalism and church state separation, the number one issue that is a problem when it comes to the mingling of religion and politics right now is the number of states that are using taxpayer money that should be going to public schools, and they're using that money to prop up religious indoctrination. It is happening more and more, and a lot of states, red states specifically, are throwing hundreds of millions of dollars in the direction of religious indoctrination. So the way it works in Alabama, for example, check this out. This is what they did last year in 2024. Alabama legislature gives final approval to school voucher-like program. The Choose Act would give up to $7,000 in tax credits for use on non-public education, including private school tuition. So they passed this bill that basically says we will give you thousands of dollars to help you pay for private schools or private tutoring or educational material. So you could get $2,000 if you were homeschooling your kids. And at the time, they said initially we're limiting the program for couples making $75,000 a year if you have one kid. But like by 2026, it's going to be open to more people. And the legislature is projected to spend over $100 million a year on this program starting next year. And the other thing you should know about how popular this is in Alabama is that more than 36,000 students applied for 14,000 vouchers in that program. That was earlier this year. So a lot of people want to take advantage of the taxpayer dollars that the state is giving away so they can attend private schools. And the thing about private schools is that most private schools are religious schools, and most religious schools are Christian schools. So they want to take taxpayer dollars to pay for tuition at private Christian schools or Catholic schools or what have you. And one of the criticisms of vouchers is most of the people taking advantage of this are people who already could afford to go to those schools. But why pay for it if the state's going to throw your money your way, right? And it's not just Alabama. This is happening in a lot of states. And this is one of the biggest concerns about school choice, which is that it's a fancy term for spending taxpayer dollars to fund religious indoctrination. But here's why I'm bringing this up right now. That program has now been going on long enough in Alabama that we now have a sense of where that money is being spent. Because if you're spending it for homeschooling curricular materials, or you're spending it at a private religious school, we can ask a couple questions. Well, what textbooks are you buying? If you go to a private religious school, what's the curriculum that the private religious school is using, and what books do they use in the classroom? And this is the thing I wanted to point out to you, because this is the headline that was in AL.com recently. In Alabama, public money buys textbooks that downplay slavery and call rock music rebellion. Honestly, I don't even know if that's the whole headline, or it should be, because those are not the biggest concerns here. But look at this. This is from reporter Rebecca Griesbach. Look at this. Many providers that receive taxpayer dollars, AL.com found, sell or use materials that downplay slavery, teach that humans lived among dinosaurs, and state that rock music and mental health issues are signs of rebellion. AL.com reviewed curricula from nearly 300 schools and verified homeschool vendors. Of the 184 private schools that publish their curricula online, nearly half, at least 79, use materials that have been flagged by experts for a lack of depth and rigor. Oh my goodness. So these private Christian schools are using textbooks that are well known for keeping kids uneducated. Like the vendors include, I can point this out here. Let me see if I can pull this up. I'll grab it. They are using books written by Rebecca, Bob Jones University, and the Association of Christian Schools International. And what is in those books? Check this out right here. In an Rebecca history textbook, Textbook, authors write that slaves seem to be better investments than indentured servants, and claim that freedmen promoted fiscal irresponsibility during Reconstruction. Jesus. Authors also blame the decline of Americans' views on race relations on the nation's first black president. Yes, that Obama, he made racism worse. Another popular provider, Bob Jones University, and it will never not be funny that a fundamentalist Christian school is BJU. They stress abstinence and encourage students to reject same-sex marriage in its health curricula. Contemporary culture emphasizes the importance of love with slogans like "Love wins," a BJU teacher's guide reads. But this slogan twists the virtue of love by disconnecting it from scripture, using it to promote the LGBTQ agenda. This is in a textbook for children. So not only is all of this very bad, when researchers looked into these books just a couple of years ago, there's a really fascinating article here. Sounds fancy, but just look at the title. Evolutionary Stasis, Creationism, Evolution, and Climate Change in the Accelerated Christian Education Curriculum. And the ACE curriculum is another one of those, Rebecca, BJU. ACE is another one that's also bad. Basically, what they found is that there was evidence of climate denial. There was a false claim that certain scientists made their discoveries only because God helped them. There were passages encouraging students to memorize what God made on each day of creation as if that's a fact. Like the practice, it was also funny to me because there were questions at the back of the chapters in some of these Christian books. And you remember textbooks from school, they would like, hey, review. Who was the legislator who did this, right? But one of the questions in one textbook said the word deck, D-E-C-K. What does deck mean? A, an angry elephant, or B, a floor of a boat? Like the wrong answer isn't even close. It's just 100% wrong. How are you learning anything from a question like that? So what happens, you might be wondering, what happens if you use your voucher money on a regular science textbook? Well, apparently that's not a safe bet either, and I forgot about this. In Alabama, guess what happens in their science textbooks? The Alabama Board of Education plans to make some changes to its science course of study, but has no plans to remove a textbook insert used since 1995 that calls evolution a controversial theory. That is that's a disclaimer that's in Alabama science books. And I had forgotten that's a thing, but it is still a thing. And that's for a regular science book. So in any case, what is going on right now is that students are being taught to use these textbooks that are anti-science, anti-history. It's all propaganda. And what happens when you use those books? Well, if you ask people who are fundamentalist Christians who grew up in that environment, let's say they're older, let's say they go to college, let's say they went to a Christian college, but now they live in the real world and they realize, oh shit, I don't actually know anything. Like maybe they go to a public university somehow after years of being homeschooled, or they go to a private Christian school and they're taking like a basic biology class, and everyone around them knows a lot more than they do because they were never prepared for that stuff. That's the danger here. Look at what one student said who used some of these books when she was younger. It's straight up propaganda, said Amy Georgievich, who learned from 2 of the 3 textbooks as a homeschooler and at a Birmingham area private school. When she went to college, she said she confronted the amount of information she had to catch up on. The biggest surprise to me was taking history and science classes and just thinking I have been lied to. And that just adds to the mental load because you're having to relearn it all over again. Or if I may correct her, learn it for the first time because you didn't learn it accurately back then either. And as she says in the article, it's not that you learn nothing in those Christian textbooks. It's that the religious education you get from a lot of those books, it's built on memorizing stuff. It's based on regurgitating information. There's no critical thinking. They don't teach kids how to analyze things because critical thinking goes against everything religion stands for. If you learn how to think critically, you might ask questions about the Bible. They can't have that happen. If you thought about this stuff long enough, none of it makes any sense. And it's not just in science either. There is a curriculum called Saxon Math. It's very popular in the homeschooling Christian world. And the focus there is on algorithms and examples, right? What they don't do in Saxon Math is teach you like number sense. How do you manipulate numbers? What are you actually doing when you're dividing a 3-digit number by a 2-digit number? Like, yes, you can do an algorithm. You can get the right answer, but at some point the problems are going to get harder, right? And if you don't know how to do the basics, not the algorithm, but if you don't actually understand what you're doing, it's going to make it a lot harder. Now, I've said this before. I taught math for a number of years. There are kids who, the kids who are good at math are the ones who understand how numbers work and they know how to manipulate numbers. And when they learn something new, they just build on what they already know. But if you're someone who just sat there and memorized the quadratic formula, which a lot of us did, like you might get a quadratic equation problem correct, but when I start manipulating it and I start asking you to do more than plug and chug, you're screwed because you don't actually know what any of these variables stand for. You don't actually know what the numbers are doing. So remember years ago, there was a lot of controversy surrounding Common Core. They were changing how they taught certain classes, the expectations in certain curriculum. They were changing. Part of the controversy was that when you're teaching math, they really want to teach kids how to manipulate numbers, how to think about numbers. And sure, that means going slower at first. It's not just about getting the right answer. It's about knowing the right process. Why? Because if you know the process, you're going to be able to do better in higher level math classes later in life. And some conservatives are like, what? Just subtract it. Carry the 1. You're done. You get the right answer. You're slow. Why are you teaching my kids to be slow? And it's like, because if they learn what you learn, they can't actually do tougher problems. That's what Saxon Math does. And the reason it's a problem is because that's the sort of math they're learning in these homeschooling curriculums. And it's not just me saying this. Check out this from an investigation. Sorry to go on my little math rant there. A 2018 Orlando Sentinel investigation into Abeka, BJU Press, and Accelerated Christian Education found that the texts focus on simple reading passages, basic math, and repetitive activities such as copying sentences with little to demand students think critically. A 2013 study found that among students from similar social and economic backgrounds, public school students tested higher in math than their peers in private schools. They also found that several private schools were using outdated math curricula, like the one I just told you about, including many of the materials currently used by Alabama private schools. So the problem here is that some of these companies that are publishing these shitty textbooks, they have been told by Alabama, like, it's totally fine. We will still endorse what you're doing. Check out this one right here. Apologia, a North Carolina-based company that publishes Christian textbooks and online courses, states in its biology curriculum that the Earth is thousands of years old rather than millions of years old. In a zoology textbook, authors claim dinosaurs came into existence on the 6th day of creation and suggest that they lived among humans. As the joke goes, they treat the Flintstones like it's a documentary. And it's not just that either. Even if a Christian curriculum is rigorous, it's often deficient or worse in other ways. Like there was one founder that I want to show you about. She decided to just start up her own textbook company. Here we go. Look at this one. Former public school teacher Karen Lemons founded Lemons Aid Learning in her Virginia home at the onset of the pandemic. Now she serves just over 3,000 students across the country. And you know, when you name your company Lemons Aid, things aren't going to go well. There's a common misconception that homeschool curricula lack rigor or aren't evidence-based, she said. In reality, our curriculum is intentionally designed using research-validated and evidence-based practices that prepare students for success in higher education and careers. But The school says all coursework is aligned with the Master's Seminary, a conservative doctrine that rejects homosexuality and the theory of evolution. Some lessons also take a firm stance on humanistic political theory, such as Marxism, which, one description reads, short circuit God's design and result in human suffering. Like, oh, so even the lady who's like, I did research, mine is solid, even she's a nutball. So, all of that is to say, Alabama is already making a huge mistake by sending taxpayer dollars and allowing them to be used for private religious schools. But now they're compounding that mistake by not having any kind of serious oversight into the curricular choices made by the schools receiving this money or the textbook companies that the money can be spent on. And that means a lot of people in Alabama are going to be wasting their voucher money on schools or textbooks that are not preparing their kids for any kind of academic success outside of their bubble. And look, I know a lot of those parents never want their kids to leave their bubble. They don't want their kids to go to a public school or outside of it. But guess what? The reality is a lot of those kids are going to escape the bubble at some point. They're either going to get a secular job, or they're going to marry someone who's not quite religious, or they're going to move to an area where there are not as many Christians in the community. At some point, they're going to face reality. And every time that happens, you will see a story about some Christian who grew up with those types of textbooks who are like, oh shit, I didn't learn anything. There's a really wonderful story in the Washington Post a few years ago where a homeschooling fundamentalist Christian couple, like both of them grew up in those circles. They got married. They had kids. They were thinking they were going to homeschool their kids as well, but they moved to a different community and they heard the public schools were good and they were worried, but they sent their kids to a public school and they realized very quickly the public school is really nice and the teacher's lovely. And they're not indoctrinating the kids against Christianity at all. And they had to grapple with, wait, is everything we were told about public schools a lie? And why is our daughter doing really well? It's like, yeah, that story happens all the time. And like, none of this is an accident. It's not like this is a glitch that everyone just noticed now and the program is otherwise flawless. This is part of the design. This is why conservatives want vouchers. They want to take away public money that could be boosting public schools and send them to private religious pipelines where there's little to no accountability and expertise is optional and indoctrination is treated like education. Like the Choose Act is not empowering families, it's subsidizing their ignorance. And the state is now rewarding companies that actively miseducate children, largely because they have a Christian focus that they refuse to get off of, all while making it harder for public schools to educate students in the area. And the worst part is that there are kids caught up in this, and they're the ones who are going to suffer, right? They're collateral damage for this right-wing experiment, and they will graduate thinking they were educated, and they will not realize until it's far too late. Nope, you never actually learned anything you were supposed to learn. And now you're the dumbest one in any room you walk into. Sorry, the rest of us knew better. Like they are preparing their kids for a world that doesn't exist except in their own fictional Christian bubble. And if those kids ever try to get a job in the secular world or go to a secular college, they will realize how ill prepared they are, all because Republicans handed their futures to anyone who could cite a Bible verse. So they're sabotaging these kids, these Republicans. Okay, I will pause there. Any questions here? There needs to be certain expectations for homeschool content, not just be able to read. Oh, I like that you think being able to read is an expectation, but that's the whole thing. And all these Christian homeschooling organizations, they want as little oversight as possible. And they get pissed off when states ask homeschooling parents to do the bare minimum just to make sure that kids are learning something. Like they don't want any oversight because they want parents to be able to indoctrinate their kids the way they want to. And if there's abuse going on, whatever, we want to make it as hard as possible for anyone to find out.